Well, about a month ago, Dr. Cochran asked me to take on this new role as coordinator of our AFRI proposals. I'm not sure that if I had known a month ago what I know today that I wouldn't have run out of his office, but nevertheless I relished the opportunity, and I've spent the last 3 weeks of my life getting an inventory of what we as a division plan on submitting as AFRI proposals. I've conducted an inventory and compiled an inventory of our pre-proposals and the letters of intent that have been submitted or planned to be submitted thus far. This is it. And I've got copies. Most of you will probably not want those, but project directors probably will. And I've got those available, so I want you to come see me when it's over with, and I will share with you that inventory. You'll probably be interested, some of you, in the results. The other thing that I've done is I have compiled a list of prospective team members internally. Those are people who have offered their expertise to a team and currently do not have an AFRI home. And prospective team members externally, that is corporate, industrial, non-traditional institutions that can offer something to our teams that we may or may not have included in our thought process. As I look at this inventory of our proposals, or pre-proposals in this case, in each program area we appear to have fairly well represented the dollar numbers available under there. I do not see any terrible discrepancies, but some of these program areas are getting crowded. And that total is wrong. In fact, I'll go ahead and tell you that this inventory is changing on a daily basis, and it changed this morning about 8 o'clock. I know of 56 proposals that we plan on sharing. I've made some observations, and with the 13 letters of intent, one observation is that they all look different. There is no standard look to them, and I think that we can work on that and improve it. In fact, some of the letters of intent are not in the format that's suggested, and we don't know if that will qualify us to be in the trash pile immediately or not. But I wouldn't want to take that chance. If that letter of intent looks sloppy, or if it does not follow the stated guidelines, we don't need to be taking those kind of chances. And so that's one observation. We do now have, at least I know, 6 caps, and all 6 of those caps look like they're well organized, but none of them look like they are shoe-ins. They don't look like slam dunks to me. We have 3 planning grants that we propose on submitting, and 1 conference grant. 3 of the program areas, the small and medium farms, the climate change mitigation, and sustainable bioenergy, we have several submissions from the University of Arkansas. If other states and other regions are following the same pattern that we are, and I suspect that they are, then these are going to be very crowded and very competitive. And so if you're a program director in one of these 3 areas, one of these 3 buckets, a 1601, a 3141, or a 6121, I highly encourage you to look at our inventory to make sure that your proposal that you're directing does not closely resemble that of somebody else's from our own institution, because if I'm looking at it, I see 2 very similar proposals, one of them is going to get ditched real quick, and I wouldn't want it to be mine. There may be opportunities for some combinations or some redirection. The other observation that I have is the ones that I'm looking at, I do not see a statistician identified on very many of these. In fact, 1 that I recall, just 1. Experimental design is going to be very important. All these outcomes have to be measured and quantified, and if you do not have good experimental design and a statistician on your team, you may not be very competitive. I don't see very much extension component identified thus far in the proposals that I'm looking at. There are some that appear to have an extension person added on as almost an afterthought. And I'm making some assumptions there, but that's what it looks like. There are very few extension project directors that I'm aware of at this point in time. And then I do not see very many education components identified. Very few. And I would also say there are some education buckets where education can be a project leader, and you're not precluded from being your own project leader. But if other institutions are including education and extension and we're not, then ours are not going to look very good, I'm afraid. I've also done a simple SWOT analysis, and as I see our strengths, our core competencies, and we're doing a pretty good job of breaking down disciplinary walls. In some of our projects, we've got some pretty good regional projects, and we're breaking down state walls pretty well. Others we are not. Others it's a two-state thing or it's a one-state thing, and I think we're in some cases we need to relook at that. The weakness is integration, because on an integrated project, if you don't have two identified competencies, we're in trouble. We've got an opportunity. Our geography and our identified centers of excellence help us and make us competitive in certain of these regional projects. I think we do have that opportunity, but the real threat is time. And some of our deadlines are upon us very quickly, and especially when we look at southern conifers, the cereals, in this case rice would be our focus, I think, and in poultry. And then some of the projects, the focus this year is E. coli and beef. And as Dr. Cochran said, the rotation may not allow us to apply, or there may not be much money available in future years. This year may be our last shot at those. So we really do have a threat of time. Well, what is my role? And my job description is very liquid. In fact, I'm writing it as I go. I'm on a very steep learning curve. I don't know what I'm doing here, because quite frankly, I've never submitted an AFRI grant. That's a serious disadvantage. Perhaps the one thing that I do have an advantage over some of you is I don't come in with any preconceived ideas. So I come into my role knowing that I'm in a service role. I hope to be a conduit for improved and timely communication. If there is a central place for us to communicate, let's consider it me for the time being. And every project director, I would appreciate your copying me on any serious correspondence between you and your team members. I also intend to institute some uniform processes. I hope to have an AFRI master calendar that will help us get a month head start on where we are this year, or perhaps 2 months or 3 months head start, so that we aren't looking at submitting at deadlines, but we're actually putting some thought and submitting in a timely fashion without some midnight hair pulling. And we need some uniform documents. These letters of intent that I'm seeing so far do not represent good salesmanship. This time next year, I really hope that when a program leader sees a letter of intent from the University of Arkansas, it represents a uniform document, it represents quality. And right now, I can't say that that's what we're looking at. And then do some pre-award evaluations, kind of a triage and priority situation, so that some of our proposals that are good can become better prior to submission. And then a post-award evaluation, so that we're continually improving these, figuring out what we did right, what we did wrong, what we can do better. And then lastly, Dr. Cochran feels like that a major role that I can play is a matchmaker for these projects. And we don't know exactly what that looks like, but I can tell you today I see some good proposals that have an incomplete team. And I may be able to help identify an additional team member that would make it a better team. I also see some real good teams that could be stronger with just the addition, for example, of a statistician or an education component. There are a lot of you who have emailed me and said, I'd love to be a team member. These are my core competencies. You would be a good team member. You don't currently have an AFRI home, and perhaps I can help you find that. And then I see a lot of similar yet competing proposals that are coming from the University of Arkansas, and there may be a good opportunity for me to get those project directors together, help them make the first couple of steps in a mating ritual and see what happens. And then develop non-traditional partners. And I include in those, and this is an incomplete list, but we've got to do a better job of collaborating with UAMS and some of our research hospitals. It's very clear that we need to have an 1890s or a minority serving component to be competitive in certain areas. And I don't know people at some of those institutions. This time next year I hope to know a lot of people. The non-land grants are encouraged, and I just don't see any of those in our current proposals. We're doing a good job of including our land grant sisters, but we need to break down some walls. The foundations, research and charitable foundations like Noble and Gates, all of them offer a lot of opportunities. And I met with my counterpart, so to speak, at the Noble Foundation this weekend. They invite us to come. They've got a hotel to put us up in. They have a large number of scientists. They have great equipment, lots of land, and they're fairly cheap partners to include on a grant. And that's just one example. The federal labs, like the Center for Toxicological Research in Pine Bluff, is fertile ground for us to make partnerships in. And the international partners like Erie and CIMMYT and some others are also underutilized, at least in terms of the proposals that I have seen so far. And other corporate partners. I hope that this time next year, and perhaps some this year, that I'll be able to have that high elevation view, because honestly, we're all working real hard. We're under a time crunch, just as these guys are with the parking barricades here, and yet they don't see where their truck is parked. And this time next year, I hope at least somebody's figuring out where the truck is parked.